I'm Carol Klein, and this is my home, Glebe Cottage. When I'm not presenting or writing about gardening, this is where I spend most of my time, and where I've been honing my horticultural skills for 40 years. Whether you've got a spacious plot, a tiny patio, or a few window boxes, there's nothing more exciting and satisfying than creating your own garden. From basic to more advanced techniques, I believe anyone can learn how to do it. Whether you're a complete novice or an experienced gardener, I want to help you develop the skills to make your garden grow. I'm ready. Are you? Hello and welcome to my garden at Glebe Cottage in North Devon. Well, the summer sun has certainly made the garden sizzle. It's really turned up the heat. But the plant family, above all, that burns the brightest has to be the daisy family. Just look at them. Heleniums galore, Rudbeckia, tagetes, and all of them daisies. Daisies take all sorts of different shapes and forms. This is the helenium. I love the whole form of it, and I love the stages it goes through too. First of all, you get these tight little buds, and then gradually, the petals begin to open. And then they form this sort of tutu around this central knob. Always looks like a sort of bronzy doorknob to me, this middle. And as time progresses, the pollen starts to fluff up here. So you get this sort of maze of tiny yellow lines all over the centre. And that's the point, of course, at which the insects move in. And they adore daisies of all kinds because they've got really easy access to all that pollen and nectar. Of course, if you want to keep these flowers going right the way through the summer, it's a fairly straightforward job. And some people think it's a bit boring, but I think it's wonderful because I think it allows you to really appreciate exactly how the plant's made, the stages it goes through. And of course, I'm talking about deadheading. I've even got matching secateurs here. So as soon as a flower reaches this sort of stage, in fact, a bit before that, when it's looking pretty scruffy, all those petals have gone, the centre has turned back to brown because all the pollen's gone too. You want to take sharp secateurs and go down and cut just above a leaf. It's a very satisfying job too, because when you stand back, the whole thing looks much more spruce, as my mum would have said. One of the most endearing features about heleniums is that they make good neighbours. They combine beautifully with other plants. I love this arrangement here, partly accidental, partly deliberate, with this Lysimachia ciliata with the tiny lemon flowers and bronze foliage, and of course with all these grasses. And then in between another aster, another daisy. This is little Carlo, and eventually it'll have tiny bright blue daisies, masses and masses of them. But by that time, with this consistent deadheading, we'll still have helenium flowers to accompany those. And by that stage also, all the grasses in here will have started to turn to gold. I use daisies all over the place. They're such versatile plants, and I love using lots of them in containers. This is a really good example. Way back in the spring, I planted up these two big iron pots that flank the steps that come down from the front door. I've just really used 3 plants in here. These beautiful agapanthus, which are just about to flower for the first time. I'm really pleased about that. A geranium, And this Rebecca, it's called Rustic Dwarf and it's grown from seed. I just love the way that the flowers are all different. Just look at that one. Rich, deep mahogany in the centre and a splash of green from this grasshopper. And even the shape of the petals is quite different from this one, for instance, with these lovely broad petals and much bigger flowers. And if I'd had them, just taking these flowers off when they're faded and over and cutting them right back down to a leaf joint where I can see that a new bud is about to emerge, then they should flower right the way through to the frost. For one group of daisies in particular, it's the hot sun that helps them hit their stride. In my garden, their arrival is heralded like a religious ritual. How about that for a barrow full of dahlias? At Klein Cottage every summer we celebrate the Dahlia Festival. Now it's not some ancient ceremony, it's just something that I've devised. It's a name I've given to the time at which I bring out my dahlias. Early this spring I started cutting back all the old stems. I always keep my dahlias in pots over winter anyway, and then I top them up with good compost. I watered them, they've been fed, they've grown on, but now is their time. Now's the time to bring them out and let them show off. Well, I thought it would be really exciting to actually use one dahlia. This is my chosen dahlia, it's a single. I grew it from seed originally, from Bishop's Children mix. I thought it would be great to try two different kind of arrangements with this as a centrepiece. So one that's based on foliage and one that's based on flowers. This is gardening at its most straightforward. I'm not even going to plant them. It's glorified flower arranging. So with this pot, I want to emphasise this foliage, really make the most of it. So we want contrasting shapes and a slightly different colour too. So I'm going to add this ornamental ginger with these great big paddle-shaped leaves. It's not the ginger you eat, although it grows in exactly the same way from this sort of rhizome. But I think it's the most beautiful foliage plant. Oh, it's also a weightlifting class. I bent my knees. That already looks not too bad. But one more element, and it's this. It's this eucomis. So this one's got very strap-like leaves. And can you see in the middle those green flowers just coming? It's a pineapple lily. It needs to be tilted a little bit, I think, just so we can get the full effect. Ooh, look at that. Isn't that lovely? I love that contrast between those straight up leaves and then these big paddle-shaped leaves in the background, and in between it just intensifies this dahlia, but now for the floral smorgasbord. In contrast, I'm going to cram the second container with flowering plants. This pot's going to be exclusively daisies, so this is a lovely coreopsis. Yeah, like that. And then a really vivid daisy. And how about this for a burst of sunshine or sunset? This echinacea. It reflects the colour of that dahlia too. Isn't it lovely? I love the fact that you've got all these similar daisy shapes, and yet each plant in this little arrangement has a completely different kind of character. Isn't it lovely? Next, the summer splendour continues with a horticultural expedition to the seaside. Just a few miles from Klein Cottage is the wild, mad North Devon coast. It's bracing. You can just feel the wind blowing off the sea. It's just gorgeous. And everywhere you look, it's just pure, pure sand. How on earth can plants manage in this kind of environment? The wonderful thing about coming to any kind of natural habitat is if you've got the same sort of conditions in your garden, it teaches you lots and lots of lessons about the sort of plants that are going to survive where you are. Now, few of us actually garden on sand dunes themselves, but many of us have light and sandy soil exposed like this in full sun. And look at these plants, look how well they're doing. This is marram grass, you'll find it all around the coast of our islands. And this is what actually binds these sand dunes together. That's how they're here. And what it does is spread its roots out far and wide, and it stabilises this sand. And once it's done that, it means that other plants can move in and they can survive too. So it's a vital, vital plant. But when you look into it, look how wonderfully it's evolved with this environment. The leaves of marram grass twirl inwards, and that's to protect the stomata, the way the plant actually breathes, the organs it breathes through. And the grass is tough as anything if you just feel the outside of that blade there. And then look at this eryngium, one of my favourite plants of all time. Eryngium maritimum, just meaning an eryngium that lives by the sea. Isn't it wonderful? You can't touch it at all. It's got all these sharp, thorny sides, which means that no herbivore who happens to chance along here stands a chance of eating it. But there's a column of flowers in the middle, lots and lots of tiny flowers, but around the outside are these sharp, ferocious bracts. And if I were to dig down here, this plant has got this great big thick tap root that's going right down, right through the sand. And that means it can draw up any water or nutrient that's present. Just works brilliantly. And don't the two look wonderful together? Some plants just go it alone, happy, growing in sand and basking in sunshine. Well, the most obvious daisy here, and you can see it in vivid yellow clumps all over these dunes, is ragwort. Ragwort is a total opportunist. You'll find it along road verges in every possible venue you can imagine. But it's thriving wonderfully here with absolutely no nutrients and no water to speak of. And although it sometimes has a very, very bad press, here on the dunes, it must be a hugely important plant to pollinating insects, because each of these daisies is full of pollen and nectar, more to the point. Immediately you can see in these heads of flowers that they're composed of individual daisies, great plateaus of them, these bright, bright yellow flowers. And once they're pollinated, of course, then again it shows itself to be a daisy. Just like dandelions and so many members of the daisy family, all its seeds are born, each one, on a tiny little parachute which just takes off into the air. And it's lovely to see these great bright blobs of yellow in amongst the marram grass and the sea hollies. Seeing plants thrive and survive in their wild home has taught me so much about growing the right plants in the right places. At Klein Cottage there are lots of daisies. They've always been a priority. A couple of years into the garden, I really desperately wanted to create somewhere where I could grow all those things that love full sun, really excellent drainage. And most of the garden was no good for that. So I built this great big raised bed here. And one of the plants that I first put in was this lovely little daisy. It's called Erigeron carvinskianus, or Mexican fleabane. That's where it comes from. And although I'd only put 1 or 2 plants in here, very, very rapidly it spread itself by seed to almost every sort of crack and crevice in the wall. A waterfall of white daisies. And this eryngium, do you recognise the similarity between that and the one that we saw on the sand dunes at the seaside? It's a different one. It's called Eryngium borgatii. It's from the mountains, from the Alps and the Picos mountains of Spain. What I'd love to do is use this irrigoran daisy somewhere where it really is sunny, where it can just be itself. And to that end, I want to take a bit of seed and grow some more from seed. Come to help me collect some seed. It's lovely down here, but this actually used to be one of Sylvie's favourite spots for just basking in the sun. But times have changed. You've had to find new sunbathing venues, haven't you? Yeah. There are a few of these little fluffy seed heads, but some of it's fallen down and it's just stuck to teeny little cobwebs right the way through here. So I could always sew a cobweb. So all I want to do is pinch that off like that. I'll sow the seed now on the surface of this compost, and really nothing could be easier. I'm just going to hold it over the surface. Ooh, you can see some of the little parachutes actually taking off, but the seed itself will drop because it's slightly heavier. It doesn't really matter what time of year you do this, except sowing fresh seed is always the best policy, and nothing could be much fresher than this. I've only just collected it. And then grit on the top. And when these have germinated and they've got true leaves, then I'll just prick them out, probably into modules, give each one its own little growing space, and then later on I'll pop them on, press that down, and then I'm going to just put it into a sort of little bath of water and then watch for progress. Collecting and sowing the seed of this plant couldn't be more simple. Before too long, the plants this seed will produce will be smothered in tiny daisies. The daisy family is huge. 1 in 10 of all the flowering plants over the whole Earth's surface belongs to the daisy family. They reckon there are over 250,000 different daisy species, and they owe their success to the fact that they've been able to evolve over thousands, probably millions of years, to live in different kinds of habitats. And that's what gives them this enormous range of different flower shapes. But having said that, when you examine a daisy and look into it, they all have the same sort of construction. They're composed of 2 different sorts of florets, you call them. So around the edge are the ray florets. We call them petals. And the whole idea of these is just to advertise, to bring in those pollinating insects. So they're usually big, they're often brightly coloured too. And that's because on the inside here is where the real nectar and pollen treats lie. And this is where these pollinating insects will feed, going round and round, as the flowers within this, because although it looks like one centre, it's actually composed of loads and loads of tiny little flowers. That's what gave it its old name of compositae, because they are composite flowers, lots and lots of little ones all joined together. And they're incredibly accessible to pollinating insects too, which is another reason for their success. They distribute the seeds in different ways, but all of them, obviously, very, very successfully. And in our gardens, they're amongst the most important plants we have. Everybody grows a daisy or two somewhere in their garden. You can hardly avoid them. And guess what? I want to see more of them. Either side of the cottage, beside the front steps, there are 2 sun-drenched spots ideal for an injection of dazzling daisies. Recently, this bed had really become almost an eyesore. It's because of the blistering heat. Things had overgrown themselves. There were geraniums here, there and everywhere, but hardly a flower in sight. I just thought we've really got to do something about it. So cut lots and lots of stuff back. Come on, that's it. It's a new Olympic sport, fennel chucking. So I'm thinking of it as a wonderful opportunity to actually do some completely different things. So I think it's probably a good idea not to start with all the detail, but with the substance, the big plants that are really going to make quite an impact in here. And nothing's going to be more impactful really than this lovely miscanthus. It's Miscanthus sinensis and it's called Cosmopolitan. As ever, I'm also thinking about a succession of plants for later in the year. I've already planted a couple of shrubs in here. They're a sort of tribute to my parents-in-law. They're two Daphnes, one either side of the front door. And that's Daphne Ballure, Jacqueline Postel, so there'll be something to see here in midwinter too. Thump. I think that's probably just the right place. Didn't want it, you know, really central in this bed, just off to one side slightly. Isn't it gorgeous? Summer is when it's at its best, but in the autumn the whole thing will gradually turn to bronze. Now for some daisies that will shine later in the season. Well, the very first of my daisies, this is a Coreopsis, and I think it's one called Lanceolata. So these lemon flowers have just opened, so it's going to go on and on way into the autumn. Very handsome plant. But it's been in its pot a while and its leaves are just beginning to yellow off, so I think it will really benefit from being planted and getting its roots firmly into the ground. I think this Coreopsis is absolutely going to love living here. It's from North America, so it's almost certainly from the prairies. And you hear a lot of chat about prairie plants. Well, loads of the best daisies that we grow in our beds and borders come from the North American prairies. So they mix and mingle really well with other plants too. And they're really easy to accommodate. And don't they look just lovely? Just imagine how many there are going to be. How about that for a daisy? Isn't it lovely? This is one of my favourite plants, but it's very unusual. I think it's got a kind of old-fashioned air. It's called Stokesea leavis, Mr. Stokes' blue aster. And I just love all this sort of complicated centre to it. It's so beautiful. And I think this is the right sort of place for it. Look at that. I'm really happy with the few plants that we've put in. They've already made a big difference to this bed. And I'll continue with that planting and then go off the other side of the steps and carry on with that too. And I really do think that this is going to bring this whole thing to its summery best. This is just a start. There are more daisy delights to add later. Next, I have a harvest festival to celebrate. Sylve's the guardian of this jungle. Look at it! Everything's just burgeoned like mad, hasn't it? And look at the corn. It's already got these flowers on the top. These are the male flowers that'll provide the pollen, that'll drop down on the female flowers, and eventually we'll have corn. But right now, there are loads of other delicious things ready for picking. Look at these two monsters. Actually, they're not monstrous at all, they're just giants, are both called artichokes. The Jerusalem artichokes are planted as big tubers, and these have just remained in the ground, so I thought I'd harvested them all, but I didn't. But these lovely globe artichokes, I grew them all from seed. I'm quite proud of them, actually. So these are 2 years old, but this little row here, I sowed the seed last year, and the resultant plants are put out only in this spring, and yet they've already started to bear fruit, or flowers that is, because that's what you harvest in the case of globe artichokes. It is their flowers. Unlike globe artichokes, it's the roots of Jerusalem artichokes that we eat. And last autumn I had a fine crop. Of course, I'm in the vegetable garden, and you think of both kinds of artichokes as vegetables. And yet, of course, they both have flowers, and they're both members of the daisy family. But I want to tidy them up, make them look respectable, and then I want to harvest a couple of them as well. I've been waiting for this moment. Now, when any plant starts to flower, it's often at the expense of its foliage. So I want to remove a bit of this, because can you see some of it's gone really quite tatty. I'll start at the bottom and just pull these leaves off. They'll go on the compost heap naturally. Well, the reason for removing these leaves that are on their way out is twofold. For a start, they're not going to do the plant any good anymore. They're better off on the compost heap. But also, they allow me to see quite a lot of bare earth in between. And at this time of year, that's incredibly exciting, because it means I can sow something else. Well, now for the fun bit, to harvest them. So I'm just going to cut it off right there. Look at that. It's a delight, really, to grow something that's so very special. It's always good to grow the things that you want to eat, and it's surprising just how many people don't do that and just grow them because they can. But in this case, I could have a whole bed full of artichokes and it wouldn't be too many. Away from the main veg garden, in my concrete troughs, golden squashes are lolling around in the sun. Every single one of them has got at least one fruit on, and we'll probably end up with 2 or 3. But for now, these lettuces. This is Little Gem, and of course it belongs to the daisy family. Eventually, if I left this and it went to flower and then to seed, you'd see all these tiny little daisy flowers. But right now, they're absolutely perfect for picking. I could let them get a heart on them, but I don't want to. I just want to take them up like that, and all I'm going to do is just turn them and snap them off, shake a bit of that soil off the bottom. Look at that, what a beautiful little rosette that is. And I think I want several of them because I want a big salad tonight. Salad days. Days of sunshine and summer. Aren't they lovely? The harvesting bonanza doesn't end outside. There's also a positive treasure trove inside the greenhouse, just waiting to be plundered. Look at it! Isn't it wonderful, being surrounded by all this greenery? But it's not at all oppressive, because everything in here is just full of fruit and really prolific. And if you imagine the seeds that have grown all these plants in here, everything, cucumbers, peppers, tomatoes, the lot, they'd fit into the palm of your hand. And now look at them. But what I want to do first is harvest some of these cucumbers, short secateurs, and just snip them off with a little bit of stem like that. And again, just, oh, they're heavy, they're wonderful. Of course, they're all full of water. They're very, very watery, all cucurbits are. But aren't they beautiful? Everything's looking knockout, and the aubergines are like heavyweight champions. Wouldn't you be excited by this? Like a great big shiny boxing glove. It's beautiful, I can hardly Look, hardly get your hands round it. It's just lovely, but it's ripe. And can you see on this plant, well, on all of them, there are loads more coming. So the sooner you take that off, once it's ripe, the more you're going to allow these other ones to come on. Look at that. You really do feel like singing rockabye to it, isn't it gorgeous? We won't have too much for our dinner, aren't we, really? For me, no summer harvest is complete without unearthing some more hidden, edible treasure. Every year I grow some of my potatoes in great big containers like this. And of course, if you haven't got a garden at all, this is a great way of growing your own spuds. And nothing tastes as good as those first fresh new potatoes. It's a magical time. Kids love watching these potatoes suddenly appear, but so does everybody else. You don't have to be a kid. So are you ready for this? 1, 2, 3. Woo! Isn't it just magic? And they're golden too. They really are like treasure, aren't they? Look at this. This is something everybody should get the chance to do. It's so satisfying. And when you dig your hands into this earth, it's actually warm. It's lovely. And this is what vegetable growing is all about, isn't it? Having this lovely fresh produce, knowing exactly what you've done to it and knowing it's just going to be so good to eat. This time of year, it's not just about harvesting, although that's wonderful to see the bounty from what you've sown, but it's also about planting out and thinking about crops that are going to take you right on through the rest of the year and through the winter too. And enter the brassicas. The great thing about brassicas, whether it's cabbage, sprouts, kale, whatever it is that they take you right on and provide food all the way through the winter. All these brassicas are all descended from seaside plants. They can be buffeted and bashed by the wind. They're really, really tough plants. But one of the most important things you must do when you're planting cabbages is plant them deep, because they have tap roots, and the whole idea of that tap root is it can support whatever it is that's on top. A cabbage with a great big head, a tall stem of sprouts, whatever it is. I'm going to start with a cabbage. Why not? It's the most traditional, isn't it? And this is one called Greyhound. It's a very, very popular variety. Now really I should have planted these before they made this great big stem. But what I'm going to do, see, it's got lots and lots of fibrous roots, but it will eventually make a great big long tap root, which will keep it down deep in the soil. Because what I'm aiming at is to ensure that that stem is almost under the ground. So I'm going to drop it right down there. Push it down firmly. Whenever you're planting any kind of brassica, it's really vital to make sure that they're firmly planted, partly because you don't want any windrock, because that will make them go to flower and go to seed. And what should we have next? Let's have a red cabbage. I love red cabbage. And they're very expensive, actually. Of course, the price goes up at Christmas time because they are such a favourite then. And we'll be able to use some of our apples from our Cox's apple, just thinking ahead. And some of the onions I've grown too. Put them all in a great big casserole dish. In you go, and exactly the same thing. Really deeply planted, firmed down very, very strongly. It's so strange that just as you're planting out your brassicas, that's when you see the first white butterflies. And of course, they're the ones that lay the eggs. And from those eggs hatch the caterpillars. And if you're not careful, they'll decimate the lot. So I'm taking no risks with this year's Christmas dinner. Ooh. It's not really the weather for doing this, but I've got no alternative. It's very, very closely knit, so nothing's going to get through there. But I defy any butterfly, cabbage white or whatever, to get through that. Those cabbages are going to be really happy. Next, I turn my attention away from edibles and towards planning for late summer colour. Put down your secateurs, forget about deadheading, watering, weeding, propagating, and just come out into your garden. Just enjoy it. Occasionally when you come down here, especially when you come through into this lower part of the garden, you almost feel like you're trespassing, because there are so many creatures just going about their business all over the place. Bees and butterflies galore. So many of them all chasing around. They especially love these cosmos. I've seen so many bees just going round and round in circles. Seeing the garden's wildlife feasting on the plants you've grown is so rewarding. The cycle of gardening continues. Just a few short weeks ago, these beds were brimming with astrantias and roses. But now they've taken a bow, stepped out of the scene and made way for all sorts of beautiful big daisies, lots of cosmos. And look at the stems of autumn flowering asters, Harrington's pink just coming on there, just ready for that final sort of show. All the summer fruit has been picked now. Look at this apple. I can remember thinning all this fruit to make sure that the apples that remained got bigger and better. But I don't even know whether I did enough, because look at the weight of these boughs now. They're absolutely groaning with fruit. Aren't they lovely? Every picture tells a story. You look at a bed like this and you can just remember all the things that have happened during its brief history since it was replanted. We've got primulas down here, Lilacina plain, a very special old primrose that we divided. They've made brilliant plants. And then there's an aster. So far it's just been these tight little leaves, these clumps, and then these wiry stems have extended. And now they're absolutely brimming with daisies. Perhaps the most sort of significant sign of how things have moved on is these foxgloves. We grew them from seed, we planted them out. They flower beautifully, these pure white foxgloves. And now all that remains is these arching stems with the very last vestiges of flowers. And bees still visiting them, still making the most of them. That's what's so wonderful about gardening, isn't it? Just seeing the way that everything changes. Being part of that whole kind of rhythm. It's just lovely. Gardening's so many things, isn't it? It's a bit about science and botany, it's a bit about craft, learning how to grow plants, but it's also about putting plants together. It's that whole sort of creative side of it that I absolutely adore. The latest project I'm fully immersed in is the beds by the house, which need daisifying for summer. Well, this is one of the daisies I'm just longing to put in here. I've no idea why I haven't used any echinacea in here at all. I mean, a lot of them would be the wrong colour anyway, but this is going to look perfect with the Miscanthus cosmopolitan in the background there. It picks up exactly the same colours, this lovely mixture of green and white, and then with these great big cones in the centre. In fact, echinacea takes its name from the Greek echinos, which is a sea urchin, and they are quite prickly. With a lot of daisies, it's really important to deadhead them, but not in the case of echinacea. because not only are they very structural, these centres, after the petals have fallen, those seed heads are absolutely brilliant bird food, manna for birds. I can't grow echinacea in a lot of places here where my soil is really heavy. They just don't thrive in these beds and borders further down, but they'll love this position. Well drained, really, really sunny, quite exposed too to the elements. There we go. Oh, look at it in the sunshine. You can just tell that it's revelling in this sunshine, isn't it? Given the right conditions, echinacea are perennial, they'll come back every year and they'll get bigger and better. Lots of perennials are like that. Each year the clump gets bigger, even if they don't spread hugely. They sort of gather more substance. It's just like growing up, I suppose. Oh, I never realised that. It's got the most beautiful perfume. Oh, as if it didn't have enough going for it already. How lovely. I'll tell you what though, you don't want to get your nose too close because these cones really are quite prickly. Sea urchin like. Look at that. Not an unusual colour. This is a zinnia. And I grew a mass of zinnias from seed. And they used to be in my granddad's garden. They were his pride and joy. It's a whole wonderful colour range. They're almost like dahlias and they're from the same kind of place, from Mexico and Central America. So easy, just from a few seeds to raise a great wealth of plants. Absolutely lovely. In fact, they'll still be out when this Rudbeckia comes out. Yet another daisy. It really is daisy-licious, isn't it, this bed? That's more like it. Yeah. Isn't it exciting? This whole bed's just taking on, I don't know, completely different. It's not a different persona, it still feels the same, but it's like it's got a whole new wardrobe. I'm quite pleased with the way these two beds are looking. And I'm looking forward to seeing them develop too. I'm so used to rushing out of this front door, dashing out down the steps and into the garden. But now I think I'm going to be much more inclined to hesitate. I've really enjoyed sharing my garden with you this summer, and I do hope that I'll be able to welcome you back again.
We do too, Carol. It doesn't really come up posher than Highgrove. We get an exclusive behind-the-scenes tour in Secrets of the Royal Palaces tomorrow at 6:30. Next tonight, what's life like when money is no object? We're jet-setting off to Monaco to see how the super-rich live, brand new, after the break.